Thank you again, Amanda, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Judy. And thank you to the Inspire team for inviting me to speak today. Thank you all for joining us. And I hope that we'll have a great webinar together. I hope to share some information with you all today. I want to start by saying I'm not an expert on anything but my journey and my story, but I hope that by sharing that with you, it'll make yours a little bit easier. I'm going to share some insight from my perspective as a caregiver to a rare family and as a patient with chronic illness and chronic pain myself, and also share some tips that I've learned over 25 years as a nurse and more than 5 years as a patient advocate and support group leader. So hopefully we'll all walk away from this with a little bit more knowledge, and I'm happy to see that we'll be sharing a lot of information that you guys will be looking for from the poll results. So let's get started, and please, if you have questions, feel free at the end to ask any questions you may have. So jot them down as we go through, and we'll learn a little bit more together. So this is a presentation about navigating life with chronic illness, and I'm going to start with first the lessons that I've learned as a volunteer. So volunteering has always been important to me in my life. It became a little bit more difficult to volunteer, and the way I volunteer changed after my illness really kind of took over my life. In 2012, I found myself bedbound after a fall and a head injury, and I created kind of a lifeline for myself while I was bedbound. I was looking for a diagnosis and unable in the small state that I live in to find one that was explaining all of my symptoms, and went to the internet to find help like many of us do. So I created a group on Facebook that initially was in search of connecting with others and finding others in my area to help myself find a diagnosis and form a sense of community. That was really important to me at a very difficult time in my life, and it actually, without knowing it, I was laying the groundwork for what is now a network that connects tens of thousands of patients globally who live with complex, chronic, or undiagnosed illness. I was at the beginning stages, unbeknownst to me, of creating the Dysautonomia Support Network. And with hundreds of other patients over the last 5 years, we've been able to create the support network. And it helped me find a way to move forward at a very difficult and anxiety-provoking time in my life. And I'm happy to say that we're able to do that now and empower other patients and help them through that process, make it a little bit easier for them at that time as well. So it was a time for me that the only people who understood what I was going through and the devastation of just suddenly being struck down by my own body were strangers that were kind of all over the world. I'd never met them, and we were only connected by a keyboard. So I've learned a lot in the last 5 years and spent a lot of time online and met a lot of people in person, heard their stories, seen what works and what tragically ended in other ways, and I've learned a lot from that. And I've had the privilege of meeting wonderful people all over the country for various reasons, and also met a lot of people at some of our support group meetings and events, and it's been a great experience. So hopefully that information I can share with you today will make your experience a little bit easier when you're navigating through these murky waters. So first thing I want to say is I see patient pitfalls everywhere. I see, and I've made them myself, I see people doing things that are very easy mistakes to make that I kind of just want to give you a heads up on, a little warning about. You know, don't compare yourself to other people. Don't compare yourself to healthy people. Don't compare yourself to sick people either, or people that you see online, because you're only seeing a snippet of their life. you're only seeing the part that they want you to see, and you don't have the whole story. So always remember that you are you're on your own journey, and you're on your own time schedule. So be kind and be patient with yourself. Your journey is not going to be the same as everybody else's or anybody else's, okay? And you have to expect that you're going to have setbacks. They happen to everybody. And with chronic illness, it's more common to have setbacks. This is not a time to quit. Persistence is the key to success. So expect them. Don't be derailed by them. And just know that it's temporary and you're going to move forward. I think it's important to always remember that and just say this is part of the journey, okay? It's also important to educate yourself about your condition, but not playing doctor, because that can get very dangerous. So there's this middle ground of how much, do I need to know to be safe and have an intelligent discussion and not go overboard, because sometimes people kind of take things into their own hands that they shouldn't. And I've seen people, unfortunately, make some very seriously bad decisions that have led to tragic outcomes because of this. So it's easy to miss the elephant in the room when you're focused on the wrong thing. And it can be dangerous, even deadly, to self-diagnose. So you need to have balance in all that you do, and it's really hard to do that sometimes as a patient. But it's something that I want to caution you all about, and talk to other people and make sure that you're not losing your balance. The other thing that I find tricky is finding healthcare providers. We're going to talk about that more later. It's really hard, and some of us, myself included, travel long distances to seek care at specialty centers or from doctors that are specialists in our disorders. And that can be tricky too. Like, when do you do that? How much do you invest in traveling, and the money involved, and the stress, and the time, and what are the expectations there? Can you maintain a relationship long term? Can you afford the travel long term? These things. So a lot of times we get so excited about getting in with these doctors, we don't think about long term. Is this sustainable for me? So just be thoughtful about those things, and be aware that not every opportunity is a good opportunity for you. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation further down the road. We're going to talk a little bit more about tips and ways that you can become a better communicator, as you guys indicated also that you wanted to learn more about in the poll, which is great. And we're going to talk about some other pitfalls that you may come up against. So we're going to just also make sure that we never take a medical advice from someone who is not a medical professional. Online especially, people get very comfortable with giving medical advice, and that is very unsettling. People mean well most of the time, but it can be very dangerous. Don't change your medication or your treatment plan based on something that worked for somebody else in a group that you're in, that even if it's that said, well, my daughter went from here to there, or I became totally symptom-free because of this new protocol. You need to discuss that with your doctor. Take the information for sure, write it down, but discuss it with a doctor. You may have different underlying conditions, a metabolic condition, an intolerance, even natural supplements can be harmful. So always, always take that to your physician, please, before you do anything else. The next thing we're going to talk about is lessons that I learned as a nurse. So I've been a nurse for a while. I've worked in several different areas of nursing, and we want to make sure that you just you're careful and you know how to communicate well with doctors. You want to make sure that you're very clear at all times on communications and on communication tactics, and understanding the basic needs of your disease or your disorder, because doing that will enable you to communicate more effectively when you're with medical professionals. They don't have a lot of time to spend with you. So your understanding and participation in your health is vital. This is valuable time that you have with them, so always use it wisely. And if you have trouble doing that, don't ever hesitate to bring somebody with you, okay? Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with the slides here. Bring somebody with you to these appointments. Grief, balancing your physical and mental health is really tricky, right? And grief is a normal part after being diagnosed with a chronic illness. It's a normal part of the loss that we experience. The illusion of our health is now gone, right? And I say the illusion of health because I believe it is an illusion. But we see ourselves differently, and we start to see our future differently. So grief is very normal, and there's very complex feelings that go along with that. So it's okay to acknowledge that. There's a lot of information out there about the stages of grief or the process of grief, especially involving chronic illness, and I would really recommend that you look into that if you're struggling with this. You kind of have to redefine yourself, and it can take a while to do that. It's very helpful to find a therapist that's well-versed in patients with chronic illness. If this is something you're struggling with, to read, I love to read. I read a lot of books related to topics that I feel I'm struggling with or to learn more. But there's a lot of good books out there, and it's important to recognize your feelings. You can't stuff them down. You can't get angry or bitter. You have to kind of just say, these are my feelings, I acknowledge them, and I need to move forward. It's totally normal and it's totally okay. Grief after any loss is expected. Chronic fatigue, pain, loss of independence, fear of the unknown or not being able to get a diagnosis, even fear of the diagnosis that you get, physical limitations, they're all triggers for anxiety and depression. And these things are pretty common in chronic illness communities, understandably so. They don't mean they're the reason for your disability or your pain or your disorder. Sometimes they're like a symptom, a secondary effect of it. And I think it's super important for you all to feel comfortable in talking to your providers about that and saying, clearly, you know, this is not in my head. I clearly have these problems and these diagnoses, but I feel like I'm not coping with it well, and I would love to talk to somebody about it. I think it's really important to balance your physical and mental health. The sheer volume of the information and appointments and developing your plan of care can be overwhelming and stressful. Just ask for support. Get yourself into a good support system. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. And don't be ashamed. It's okay. It's totally normal. Because if you can get that nice balance, you're going to feel better physically and mentally. Your physical health and your mental health are dependent on each other. You have to address both to get better and to feel physically and mentally stronger. Be proactive with your mental health. You're really worth it. Symptoms can improve in both areas, but only when they're recognized and treated appropriately. So we're going to talk about some communication tips here. So I talked to you a little bit earlier about, as a nurse, I've noticed most patient-doctor issues or patient-nurse issues or healthcare provider issues boil down to communication. And sometimes anxiety can get in the way of that communication, so we talked about addressing that. But we want to make sure that if you're anxious and you get anxious, or some people get white coat syndrome, right, that you bring somebody with you that can help you communicate well. So bring a friend or a family member. If you have any type of a language barrier, bring a translator with you to make sure that there's no barriers between you and the person that's trying to help you, okay? Have them take notes for you too, if you forget things a lot. Also, understand that doctors will likely have a very limited time to spend with you, so put your phone away. That drives doctors insane. Don't be focused on anything but them when they're in the room, please. Always be honest, polite, and respectful, even when they aren't really giving you the results you want. it'll be worth it in the long run, I promise. Don't assert yourself as more knowledgeable than the provider. A lot of people tend to do this. I see it a lot, and it rarely ends well for the patient. It shuts the doctor down immediately, and there's this tension that just never goes away. So be humble, share the information that you have, but share it respectfully with the doctor, okay? And sometimes we do know more than them. It's the nature of the beast. But just be humble when you approach them, and you'll get further. Make sure you arrive on time, and make sure that you have an up-to-date medical ID sheet. And what should be on that ID sheet? It could be an app on your phone, but it needs to be printed somewhere clearly. It should have your medication list. Make sure it's up to date. A lot of people show up with these that are like 4 years old and all the dosages are wrong. But make sure you have your medication list. Include over-the-counter medications, supplements. And if you use medical marijuana, please be honest about that and please put that on the sheet. It does matter, okay? Not because anybody's going to be punitive, but it does matter in some circumstances as far as anesthesia and things go. Include your allergy list, your diagnosis list, emergency contact information, your primary care physician information, and any other specialist information that doctors may need to communicate with, like your cardiologist, your neurologist, your pain doctor, okay? And if you're going in for surgery or something related to a cardiac condition and you are a dysautonomia patient or you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or something, you might want to bring your last echocardiogram or EKG results. If you know they're probably going to ask for it and you have a copy at home, do them a favor and bring it in. They'll love you for it. And also, this is just a standard thing to have with you anywhere you go. And why I say to have those is because if you have an emergency and you're out and you can't talk, if you get to be nonverbal, like some of us may have a syncopal episode and you're nonverbal, this is all together for emergency providers, which is awesome to have in that situation. So have it with you. You'll have it for your doctor's appointment. You'll have it in an emergency. It's great to have. So you'll have all that with you, but when you go to a regular doctor's appointment, in addition to that, just jot down a couple of questions to bring with you to an appointment. Just 2 or 3 questions at each appointment, and bring those with you. And leave yourself a little space on the paper to jot down his response or her response to your questions and take it home with you. Always use clear and direct language. And if they don't seem to understand what you're saying, don't be shy and repeat yourself. When you're telling them about a symptom or a problem, tell them the whole story about why you're there from the beginning and proceed chronologically. Now try to do that in a minute or 2. Don't take 10 minutes to tell the story. But practice at home before you go and say, how can I get this down and get all the important parts in a minute or 2 if it's a long story, okay? And describe what you're doing when you experience the symptoms. That's important to us as healthcare providers and how often it happens. So I only get, heart palpitations when I'm lying in bed, or I only get chest pain when I'm exercising or going up the stairs. Those are important details, and this has been going on for like the last 3 years. That could save a lot of diagnostic testing. So be as specific as you can. Don't minimize or exaggerate the symptoms or your pain. Be as factual as possible. I tend to minimize things a lot. It's one of my problems because I've been in my body a long time. I call things body drama a lot, and I minimize things. So it's one of the things I work on personally is to be factual, and I've gotten used to some things that aren't really normal, like many of you probably have. So just be factual and say, this is what it is. Pain scale 0 to 10. 10 is the worst pain imaginable. 10, I would be, passed out in the hospital. That's childbirth pain. And 0 is none. and keep it on that scale. Don't make a different scale for your disorder. That doesn't cut it. You know, that confuses everybody. 0 to 10, this is where I'm at right now. You know, let them know clearly where you're at. Explain how your symptoms or your pain impact your life and limit you. Because at the end of the day, that's what they want to know. Right? How can we make your life better? So if I say my pain is at an average of a 6 every day, and I can manage that pretty well because I've got all these things that I've learned to do over the years. But when it's at an 8, I can no longer do A, B, or C. That I'm coming to them for help to get it back down to below a 6. Then they have a goal. Then they have something they can help me with, right? Because when you have complex chronic illness, they look at your chart and they're like, oh my gosh, how can I help this person? It's overwhelming to doctors. And they do want to help, but sometimes they don't know how. And if you have genetic disorders, they can't cure you. So you have to give them a reasonable goal. And they will usually try to help. So tell them, this is what I want you to do for me. This is how you can make my life better. And if you do have underlying causes like genetic factors or related conditions, let them know that up front. So kind of help them out a little bit. You'll need to ask some questions along the way, okay? So depending on the setting and what your appointment's about, feel free to ask questions. Be interested in them and ask them to be interested in you. So ask them, you know, share with them your diagnosis. And ask them, have you ever had a patient with this diagnosis before? Do you know, how much do you know about it? Are you interested in learning? Do you have the time to learn more about this? You know, is there anything I can do to make our visits more productive? What can I do to help meet our goal to get my pain level down? Is there anything that you think I can do to make our visits more productive? Or you can say, I realize that because of my chronic issues, these visits are longer than the average patient's. How can I make it easier for us to have productive visits in a shorter time? Would you like to schedule my appointments closer together? Because at the end of the day, you want this relationship to work for both of you. You want the physician not to get behind and feel stressed and not get paid for the time he's with you. So sometimes the solution is just him seeing you more often, and you only doing 1 or 2 questions a visit or 1 or 2 issues a visit instead of 4. And then you have a great relationship, okay? So when he offers you a new plan of care, it's important to ask other things, like what are the risks and benefits of that test? Or you're offering me a new medication. Is there any risk? Is there a side effect that I should be concerned about or watch out for? Or how long would you like me to do this for? So he gives you a new diet. You should ask him, do you want me to do this for the rest of my life, for a month? How, you know, when are we going to reevaluate this change to my treatment plan? And when should I start? When should I stop? How would you like me to give you feedback about how it's going? These are all really important questions that I think people don't ask enough. And doctors forget to tell people. They kind of just assume people know. So these are great questions to ask. And if you have a patient portal situation where you can email your doctor, it's ideal. It's a great way to get feedback. So ask her about that as well, okay? When things don't go so well, there are a lot of situations or times where you meet a doctor, you get your hopes up, and you think this is going to be the one, this is going to be the guy that makes my life better. And sadly, things don't go well. So there's communication struggles, or he's not interested, or he's figured out before he even walked in the room by looking at your chart that this is all in your head. And it's just going south quickly. So what can you do? So here's some tips. Ask the doctor to repeat back to you what they heard if there seems to be a communication issue. Sometimes that can help nip it in the bud. If that's not working, just use clear, again, this is from the other list, use clear and direct language and repeat yourself again, okay? Speak up, ask questions, and try to nip miscommunications in the bud. Reiterate what you said. And if the doctor gets off track, he comes up with some diagnosis that you don't agree with or treatment plan, respectfully disagree. Just say, doctor, I don't agree with that. Can I just ask how you came up with that? And you might want to ask him, is there any other diagnoses or any other treatment plan that you might have to offer that explains these symptoms, or is there anything else you have to offer? If they don't offer you anything else, then I would politely ask, who would you recommend for a second opinion? And if they give you a name, I would take it, and I would thank them for their time. And then I would also say before they leave the room that you would like a copy of their notes for your records and ask them how to make that happen. This will set the tone for them knowing that you're not really happy with the visit and you will be requesting records. So hopefully they'll be mindful of how they document that visit, knowing that you'll see it, and give you a name of someone to follow up with. Doesn't necessarily mean I would go to the person they send me to, but I would consider it. And then I would go back to the drawing board and look for somebody else. So here are some lessons I've learned as a caregiver. I have been in a caregiver role. Sorry, I clicked ahead there. I've been in the caregiver role as both a caregiver of a complex patient as a daughter and as a parent. So I can just tell you that caregivers are amazing, and thank you all for all that you do. It can be an exhausting, rewarding, overwhelming, and downright confusing role to be in. And they also need to focus on their physical and mental well-being to avoid caregiver burnout. They need to have a separate support system, and they need to practice regular self-care, which is really hard to do. It's also important to recognize when a caregiver relationship becomes a little dysfunctional. And this does happen a lot, and I see this a lot in our community. Understandably so. This is a tough road, and there's really not a lot of great support out there for caregivers or the chronically ill. You know, the goal is to give support and aid when it's needed to people with chronic illness. The caregiver should be there to help, but they should also allow for independence, dignity, and personal growth of the person that's struggling through chronic illness. It's really difficult as a parent, especially I've found, and especially the parent of teenagers, because you're going through that normal life struggle of teenagers separating that natural growth and development. And then it gets really complex when they become overly dependent at times due to their illness. So it's a very delicate balance and anxiety-provoking. And that's for both the patient and the caregiver. And the same is true as people age with chronic health conditions, and they lose their independence and their ability to drive, which is another natural part of aging. But then it gets kind of sped up sometimes by chronic health issues, and there's also some struggle there. So be patient with yourself, get the support you need. Again, consider finding a therapist that could help with these situations, and be aware that burnout can happen, and have like a checklist with yourself and your loved one and talk about these things, and know if you're struggling, if you feel unsafe, if you're struggling with defining boundaries in your caregiver relationship, if you feel like you're struggling for control or you're developing resentment over daily tasks in your relationships, seek help and advice from a therapist familiar with chronic illness relationship dynamics, because they're difficult. If someone is abusing you physically, mentally, sexually, or financially, alert a doctor or nurse. You can do this at any appointment or confide in a trusted friend to seek help. Resources are available on our website and links for more information. Our website, by the way, is www.dysautonomiasupport.org. But being ill does not mean you're in a situation that you need to be abused or you should accept abuse. It does not devalue you. You should never feel unsafe, threatened, or controlled by a caregiver, and you should not be denied access to your medical providers or medications. Being isolated at home without access to a phone or computer intentionally by someone could be a controlling situation that could be abusive. Not always, but it could be. And again, if you're being discriminated against because of your illness, reach out, talk to somebody, find support. Please don't let yourself be in those situations just because you're ill. So things I've learned as a patient, I'm having a little trouble with the slides, I apologize. Trying to navigate two at the same time is a little tricky for me. So things I've learned as a patient are to get organized, use technology, develop your game plan, recruit some good talent, build your team, position your players, and create a support system. So we're going to go through that really quickly right now on these next slides. And so here are my tips for getting organized. So create that medical ID sheet that I talked about. Update it monthly, carry it at all times. Keep your medical records organized, file the most recent records on the top. Keep a copy of all your test results that you can get your hands on, and get copies of discs of any imaging that you have. Organize them by year. I find that most easy because doctors usually only want to see the last year or two of records. Unless there's a special request, don't bring them years and years of documents. It will overwhelm them. Keep separate binders or file folders for each member of the family if you're like me and you have a bunch of zebras. I have different color-coded files for everybody just to help organize things. And take care of power of attorney and other medical legal paperwork whenever you're able to do that, whenever it's feasible for your family, and give a copy to each person that's named and to each of your regular healthcare providers for your chart with them, so that that's out of the way before any type of a situation may strike. Okay? Use technology. So keep a current medication and allergy list in your phone. Use medication reminder apps to help you stay on track with your meds. Keep your provider contact information stored in your phone under the first name doctor. So when you store your doctor's phone numbers, say doctor, last name, and then I try to store in their type of doctor it is and their information. That way, if I'm ever in a situation where I'm nonverbal or unconscious, EMTs can get into my phone and get that information. Download the In Case of Emergency app, ICE app, update it monthly. It keeps all your information there and your emergency contact all in one nice, neat place. Store a picture of your ID and insurance cards in your phone. This is a little trick I do in case I forget my wallet. It's all right there on my phone. Learn about emergency features on your cellular device. So many of them have special features where you hit a certain button twice and it automatically will let people that you designate know that you're in trouble and your location, and some of them will also alert 911 to let them know that you need help. So check that out. Check out your phone and what emergency devices are available. We talked about patient portals already, and back up your medical records on a thumb drive if you're able to quarterly. If you have that technology, that would be great. Okay, I'm a little trouble with clicking. Okay, so we're going to talk about developing your game plan. So just like in football, you need an offense and a defense strategy and talented players to have a great game when living with complex medical conditions. So there's actually a way that you can control things to a degree. And one of them is recruiting good talent. The game is always changing, and having the right players and thinking strategically with constant adjustments can improve your chances for success. Just focus on one play or game at a time and don't get overwhelmed. So what should you look for? When we're looking for providers, research their education, their experience, hospital affiliations, okay? Check with your insurance company to ensure they're in network. You can check our website, the DSN website, to find patient-recommended providers in your area. Ask around, ask friends in your area that have similar conditions, and make sure you check this list, that they're personable, that you feel comfortable, they're interested in assisting you meet your health goals, they have an organized office, they're accessible within a reasonable time frame, and they work collaboratively with other specialists. Most importantly, that they're interested in your journey. When should you consider terminating with a medical provider? Well, these are pretty obvious. When you can't access care in a reasonable time, when you're treated disrespectfully, when you're dismissed and something's really wrong, and when they're not on the same page as you, and you've tried multiple times to enhance communication, or they're just not interested. It takes an entire team to manage complex patients. The patient must be the head coach. That's right, you're in charge. No one's going to do that but you. That's your job, is to coordinate the team. So things that you need to do to ensure that you're getting good care are get those players in the right positions. That's the hard part. Oops. So let me go back here for a second. I want you to see, like, this is a good idea of the type of team you need, and it's a lot. But to build a winning team, you've got to have talent, a game plan, communication, and teamwork. And you'll see the primary support person is your assistant coach. It's not a doctor. So you're the head coach, and your primary support person is your assistant coach. Okay? So who is that? We're going to talk about them in a minute. So you're creating your support system. So there you are in the center, and then here are possible people that could help support you. And we all need good support, right? A primary support person, though, is essential. It's one person to know your medical history. They're going to go to bat for you. They're going to take those notes at the doctor's appointments when you're having a brain fog day or you're feeling anxious. They're going to have access to your medical records in an emergency. They may be your power of attorney. They're going to be authorized to get information if needed and pick up your prescriptions and be your go-to person. I know everybody doesn't have that right now, but that's the goal, right? So where do you find that person, and how do you develop that relationship? And you want your medical providers to know this person so they're comfortable with them and they know that they have permission to communicate with them and you're okay with that. So you want to introduce them at appointments and let them get to know each other. So there's all these places that you can find support. You take a little bit here, a little bit there, and get your needs met. But there's a lot of places to find support. And let me tell you, there's chronically ill people everywhere, okay? It's not something that people talk about a lot, but once they know that you're in that world, it's like this secret club, and people will talk to you about it. Insurance tips, the down and dirty, it's tough, right? Insurance is getting trickier and harder, and with all that's going on in the country, I'm imagining it's not getting any easier anytime soon. But a few quick tips I can tell you. Develop a relationship with your case manager at your insurance company. If you don't have one, get one. Educate them on your condition factually. Send them materials if they need links to websites. Take the time to review and understand your policy. Always get pre-authorizations and referrals if you need them, because you don't want to be caught with bills and then be fighting with them because you didn't do your homework. Check your deductible, your co-insurance, your co-pays, and out-of-pocket max for in-network and out-of-network benefits every year. Things can change. You don't want to be caught off guard. If you get denied, appeal them. Most of the times, the insurance company just assumes you won't, so they'll just deny you. If you have documentation to justify the need for your services, go ahead and make the effort to do the appeal. And try to avoid using the word chronic. When you get orders or services for like physical therapy or speech language, they don't like the word chronic, so just a little tip, try to avoid that when you're getting your prescriptions. So tips for finding acceptance and adapting. Well, never underestimate yourself. Your diagnosis doesn't define you, and try to keep things in perspective. Learn how to educate people around you, don't alienate them, and never let your illness or your disability determine your worth. Don't expect others to understand fully what it's like to be you unless they have the same experience that you do. Don't get frustrated. Don't medicalize all your relationships. People just aren't going to get it until they get it. And challenge yourself and your healthcare team to meet your goals. Make sure you're setting short-term and long-term goals, and you're evaluating them regularly. Connect with others going through your experience. Lean on them in your really hard times. They'll get you. They'll understand what you're going through. You're welcome to join us on our dysautonomia.inspire.com forum. Reach out, and that's about it for me. We're open for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for a very informative presentation. Now we'd like to give everyone participating today a chance to ask questions. Please go ahead and use the questions section in the control panel to send us your question. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible today. If we don't have a chance to answer your specific question today, please go on Inspire, either on the Dysautonomia Support Network community or on one of our other chronic illness communities, and post your questions there. I'm going to go ahead and take the first question right now, which is, Amanda, you actually referred to some books during your talk that have helped you. Do you have any recommendations for dealing with grief and chronic illnesses that you could share with the group?
I do. We actually run a chronic illness book club. I like Brene Brown, basically anything she writes. I also like How to Be Sick, I think is a great book, by Tony Bernhard. There's a great grief book that I can't pull out of my memory right now, but it's specific to that. I can definitely share that information in our Inspire forum. I can post some information there. I'm going to make a note on that.
Wonderful. We have another participant who's been looking for support for NonPots dysautonomia and feels kind of ignored. And before you answer that question, if appropriate, we could always add a topic for that in the Inspire community.
She feels ignored. NonPots, you said?
NonPots dysautonomia.
NonPots. I'm sorry. I understand now. Oh, so I'm a NonPots dysautonomia patient at this point. I think there's a lot of us out there, and I feel your pain in that. I think POTS gets the most attention and awareness because it is a very common form of dysautonomia, but I feel your pain, and we really do our best at DSN to try to highlight the other forms of dysautonomia. Unfortunately, all the research seems really geared on POTS right now, and there's not a lot out there, but it's getting better. So don't lose faith, and connect with us. That's all I can say. And volunteer with us. We have like 70 volunteers, and all of our volunteers are passionate about doing the same, about getting awareness about all these other forms out there. So feel free to connect with us on our website.
And definitely join the Inspire community if you haven't, and post about that there.
Definitely.
We have a participant who says there's so much information online, feeling overwhelmed. Where should I start?
Great question. I would say it's the opposite problem that I had. There was no information 5 years ago, so I love hearing that. I would say choose 2 to 3 reputable organizations. And go look for nonprofit organizations, because if they're nonprofit, they're somewhat vetted. Not to say that they're perfect, but start there and try to find a good group of people. We focus at DSN on patient empowerment and living a positive life despite our limitations and our disabilities. Not all groups are created equal. Like some people are really just at different stages of the journey. And for us, we think it's important to have people at all stages of the journey so that the veterans can kind of help the people that are just in there and really struggling. So make sure that you're surrounded in a group that's diverse and has people that are 8 years in, 10 years in, to help guide you along the path. Because if it's a lot of people that are in the early stages, it can be anxiety provoking and overwhelming.
Our next question, looking for new doctors. When a doctor doesn't return your call, should you keep trying back or assume that they don't want to accept you as a patient? It's a constant game of being rejected.
Okay, that's a tricky question because we're in typically, I would say, yeah, move on. They're too busy or they're not interested. But from what I know, working as a nurse, sometimes that can be an issue with the office staff, and sometimes it can be an issue with the doctor just being overwhelmed with specialized patients, as we can be. I would say if calling isn't working, I would recommend emailing and or faxing. And if you have the ability to physically go in, that's what I would do. I would do that once or twice. But I would not make that my only game plan. I never put all my eggs in one basket, and I would be looking for other alternatives.
Have you found any cost-effective mechanism for getting records and facilitating communication between providers in different hospital systems or networks?
Cost-effective? No. I think technology is moving towards that. The issue I have with that is you're going to lose a lot of privacy to do it. All of these different platforms, these software platforms that are allowing the bridge of communication are somewhat, I feel, I think we should have more control over them. It's tricky, and a lot of the doctors don't take time to read the notes either. So unfortunately, it's still a problem. I don't think that there's going to be a solution in the next couple of years. I would recommend bringing the notes with you. Get the notes before you leave, and anything you want your doctor to see, hand carry it to them and say, did you see this note? And put it in front of them. I think it's important that you read this.
And we have just a comment that somebody else has said, I am a non-POTS dysautonomia patient too. So we have 2, at least, non-POTS dysautonomia patients as well as the presenter. So feel free to, post on Inspire and connect with each other. You can also email partner@inspire.com, and I will get that email. And if you both want to share your information, I can connect you with each other.
Awesome.
Do you have a tip for finding out if a physician is familiar with your condition before scheduling an appointment if you don't have any word-of-mouth recommendations or don't see much info online about them?
Basically, we've tried, by we, I mean the people in my area, have tried calling the offices of the people at the front desk really rarely know. You can try calling the front desk and asking, but honestly, I usually look to see where they trained, and if they have a university training and that particular hospital does research in these disorders, then I think there's a good chance that they might have some knowledge. It's a 50-50 shot, though. Usually I have to go in and meet them and ask them, you know, what do you know? And sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I meet doctors that I wouldn't expect to know anything about some of these disorders. I also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and Chiari and all this other stuff too, you know. But they said, oh, I trained at, you know, Beth Israel, and they had a non-collab. So yeah, I know about that. I'm like, oh, interesting. So it's hard. It's hard. It should be easier. It's not. We're working to try to make it easier for you guys. But check, we have a huge list, an international list on our website. Thousands of providers that were recommended by other patients. And it's broken down by state. So you're all welcome to use that and add to it as well.
During the program, you mentioned a case manager. Did you mean finding a case manager with your insurance company or your assist? Okay.
Yeah. Most if you cost the insurance company enough money, they will assign a case manager to you in hopes that by having a nurse oversee your care, it will save them money. But you can ask for one as a chronic illness patient, and a lot of companies will give them to you. And that will be a nurse that gets to know you and tries to help you kind of navigate your health care. And they can almost be like your primary support person. If you don't have one, they can help you figure things out. So it's pretty cool. Sometimes they'll send you cool stuff like a pill box that reminds you to take your pills and stuff. Call your insurance company and ask.
Do you have any thoughts to share about working with a functional medicine doctor?
I don't. I've kind of done it all. I've guinea pigged myself so much. And that's, I've seen a holistic doctor, but not a functional medicine doctor. I've seen an osteopath, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. I think whatever works for you works for you.
Great. Well, I believe that we have made it through most of the questions. I see one more. How can I make sure that my insurance company believes me? If I send them medical literature, will they read it?
In regards to what, hon?
Believes probably the conditions that they have. You know, a lot of times people are diagnosed with something that may not be fully recognized by the medical system.
Well, your insurance company doesn't have the right to negate a physician's diagnosis, so I would just start with that. I mean, I've been trying, you know, I've had to appeal my physical therapy treatment many times, but a diagnosis is a diagnosis. Now, they can say they don't want to pay for it, but they can't tell you you don't have something that a doctor gave you a diagnosis for. So just be clear about that and stand up for your rights. And again, get a relationship with a case manager. Ask to be assigned a case manager. And yes, you can send literature. Anytime you bring anything to a doctor or insurance company or any medical professional that's going to review it, bring a peer-reviewed journal. There's a lot in our library on our website, and there's others online. You know, go to pub.med or something. Don't bring something from a website that's not official. Bring something peer-reviewed, so you don't look like, you know, you're not well-educated yourself, because they can't argue with that.
Great, and we do have one more question, and then I believe we will be out of time. What is a good place to look for caretaker support? I have 2 daughters with chronic illness, one with POTS and one with, I hope I can pronounce this correctly, hemiplegic migraines.
Oh,
they often feel alone in their care, and I feel like I'm not enough.
Shoot me an email. I can link you to some sources, and we also do have, you're welcome on our Dysautonomia Support Network Inspire Forum, and I can hook you up with some other caregiver-specific groups if you want a separate place, and you might need that as well. But we do, I believe, have a caregiver subsection of our Inspire group, and if we don't, we'll make one.
Great, and since we have 1 more minute, it seems like there's more and more questions. How many people with dysautonomia have a service animal?
I don't know exactly how many, but we do offer service dog grants. It's one of our passions. It's one of the things that we fundraise for at DSN, and scholarships, because I think it's important, and that it's one of the things I've seen that's been able to really enhance the quality of life of people that are severely disabled with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and dysautonomia specifically. So I don't know the exact number, but it's getting to be more well-known and more popular. And there's several agencies now training dogs specifically for our patient population. And so we have grants. Again, the application's on our website. So if you need information, go to our website.
Great. Well, I see it is 1 o'clock Eastern Time. So thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today and for giving a wonderful presentation. And thank you all for logging on and listening and participating. Please check your email later.